Welcome to Lab the Podcast. Grateful to be here just ahead of Father's Day to share some time with author Patton Dodd, celebrating his latest book, The Father You Get and the Ones You Make, Believe in, and Become. Patton is the Executive Director of Storytelling and Communication for the H.E. Butt Foundation in San Antonio, Texas, where he runs Know Your Neighbor, a program that helps San Antonians to engage the story of the city and discern their role in it. Dodd is a longtime journalist and essayist whose work has appeared in the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, the Financial Times, Newsweek, Slate, CNN, and Christianity Today. He holds a doctorate in religion and literature from Boston University, and his books include this one, The Father You Get, My Faith So Far, and The Prayer Wheel. Patton is also just a really good human and a friend. So Patton, thank you. Congrats on the book. Thanks for sharing it with us. But thank you for sharing the time. Really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Zach. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, this one made me cry. I mentioned that before. Like I was sitting in my chair the other night, just like crying, and it made me laugh. It made me grateful, and it made me wrestle with some stuff that I needed to wrestle with. So good literature does that, like the best literature, best storytelling surprises us in that way. But it made me want to be a better dad at the end of it. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That's the best review I could have ever hoped for. So that's fantastic to hear. Thanks.
Yeah, we were talking before just that great art, like the whole work of V3, what we're trying to do in the world is just come back to a place where we value artists, where we're not doing a return on investment kind of equation in our brain in the arts, but we really see how powerful they are in the world. And whether it's visual art or music or literature, it has the power to, I think when we talk about poetry, Robert Frost said it helps us remember what it would impoverish us to forget. And that's what great literature does. I spent a few days with your book, hours and hours and hours reading it, and something happens to us. So we were talking about authors as artists. Is that strange to feel like you wear those clothes, or is that pretty natural for you to hear author and artist in the same sentence?
I mean, a number of years ago, I probably would have thought it was an affectation to think of myself as an artist. You know, I was an academic, I was a professional writer, I was a journalist, communications guy. But the truth is, I'm totally an artist. Like I love language in an artistic way. But the way that I read is by paying attention to the artifice of the language, of the words, the sounds of the words, the syntax, how things are put together. I chew on sentences. Someone recently asked me, what is one of your favorite things in the world? And the first thing that came to mind was sentences. I love them. And this book was a labor of love in a lot of ways. And a lot of parts of it were hard to write. And, you know, as you know, there's some tough stuff in there, some tough stories. But the thing that I loved most about writing it was working on the sentences, reading them out loud, you know, flipping them inside out, trying again. I love the craft of words. And so, yeah, I think that's art.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you are an artist for sure. And I read a lot, and I love a lot of different art authors. They give us a chance to see their artistry fresh, and every artist is different. They have their voice, they have their unique thing, but your sentences were crafted in such a way that I felt like I was sitting with you and we were just enjoying time together. And I could hear your voice. I have the privilege of knowing you a little bit, so I could hear your voice, but it came through in a really beautiful way. And that's what allowed the deeper things that you were inviting us to consider just quietly from your story, but also in our stories to come through. That is art. And so if you're an author and you're a writer, I take that away, that you are an artist, and it matters the way you use words, the choice of words, the sentence structure. They matter. And so thank you for doing it. Father's Day is complicated for a lot of people. Some people are celebrating. Some of us are grieving. Some of us don't know what we're feeling on a Father's Day. And so I thought, what a perfect book to enter maybe a moment where a lot of people are going, I don't know really how I feel this Father's Day, or maybe I haven't even slowed down to think about it. you offered a book that lets us have a really personal look into your life, the father you get. Take us back to the origin story of this book and why you decided to do this. Because again, you've written essays and all sorts of different
Mhm.
things. You got a couple other books out, but this is really different. Why
Yeah.
why was this the right book for right now for you?
Well, I pitched a very different book actually in 20 at the end of 2020. I had an idea for a book. My dissertation was in film studies, and I love movies, and I had an idea for a book about the movie It's a Wonderful Life, and I thought it was a great book idea. And I wrote a fantastic book proposal, one that I really liked a lot, and my agent did too. We pitched it to 20 something different publishers and got 20 something different rejections. Very kind rejections about how movie books don't work, holiday books don't work, so we can't do this book, even though it's a good proposal. And I was super bummed. But one of the publishers reached out and said, "We want to talk to Patton." And it was a woman named Lil Copan, an editor at Broadleaf Books. And we got on a Zoom call, and she said, "So yeah, we can't publish your It's a Wonderful Life book," but she reminded me about 10 years ago in like a bar in Philadelphia at a conference, you told me you had a memoir idea about a memoir on fatherhood, about four categories of fatherhood, the one you're born with, father figures, God the Father, and becoming a father. And she said, if you're still interested in writing that book, that's one I would really consider publishing. And I was super sad. I was flattered, but like I did not want to write that book. And so it kind of crushed me because I didn't want to think about my dad. He died in 2007. I had enjoyed not thinking about him for, at that point, about 15 years. And and yeah, I might have, after a beer, pitched that book idea to her one time, but that didn't mean I really wanted to write it. And I also had a really troubled relationship with a father figure, and I didn't want to think about that either. And so I told her thank you and did not plan on ever following up. And then like the next weekend, I went on a run. You know how you're moving your body in the woods, and the idea for the first chapter like fell into my lap, and I went home and I typed up 5,000 words without blinking basically and sent them to Lil, and she was like, "Yep, this is the book, this is what we would do with you." And so yeah, that's kind of how she was the catalyst of it. An old editor friend, remembering reaching back into our, pal. We hadn't even talked in years, but she reached back into a memory she had of something I had said and put it in my lap, and then I sat there with it and finally wrote the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, good on her for
Yeah,
the I mean, that's why she has the job she has, good intuition for the moment and what the
yeah,
world is maybe needing. I would love
for
to
sure.
talk to her because I feel like I'm in a particular place just on the edge of turning 50 next year. So the 50s are closer than the 40s,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I've got a my dad is facing a terminal illness. I'm a dad of
Hmm.
four kids. And so I feel this particular weight and complexity of fatherhood. That's all
Hmm.
swirling around. But as I read just the culture in our moment, I, and again, this is a controversial thing to say, but being a man in 2026, being a father in 2026 needs attention. I think I even heard Michelle Obama saying that with the other day,
Hmm.
just saying we
Hmm.
we can't underattend to the reality that there's something happening with men that we need to talk
Yeah,
about. We need to
for
understand it.
sure.
We need to give it some attention, and that can be a tricky thing to get into. You do it in a really winsome way, but it's complicated. This is a complicated book. And one of the things that I found, I was reading the other night, I had to put it down on my chest and just sit there. And I didn't know exactly what I was feeling. And it took me a second, but I was what I was feeling was this is complicated. And
Yeah,
it's you didn't tidy up certain parts of it too quickly. You just let it be complicated. And one of the things I was
yeah,
curious is was that a challenge to let it be complicated as a story in that way?
yeah.
Or did it just 5,000 words came out? It was just the easiest book you ever wrote.
So it was the easiest book proposal I ever wrote, but the book itself was not easy to write at all. Yes, it was extremely hard to let it be complicated. I'm seeking resolution and clarity, and they were hard to come by. And sometimes a resolution includes leaving some things undone, and just naming that. And I didn't know quite what I thought. Like I said, I had enjoyed not thinking about my dad. I didn't know much about him. I had a lot of work to do. I also had a lot of insecurities as a father, and I had a lot of troubles with the idea of God the Father and my relationship therein. So, all these topics were kind of heavy and hard and vague to me, even though I was interested in them. I wasn't sure how I would approach them. And, this is a 55,000 word book, short book. It took me almost 4 years to write the thing um, because of the very thing that you're describing. How do I talk about these things? How do I talk about being a man? How do I talk about how it feels to be a man? How do I speak into issues like toxic masculinity without like kind of doing that, directly because there's too much of that and it's boring. Um, but I wanted to wrap my head around where we are as men, how it feels to be a man in the modern era that we're a part of, our relationships with each other, how we see other men, how we see the women in our lives, how we see bosses and leaders, um, how all that comes into how we relate to our children or don't. The differences between being a man of solitude and a man in the network, all that stuff. And it's complicated. And I also think it's like underexplored. And so it's kind of, not that there's nothing written about these things, but I did find it hard to find good resources for reflection. So that was also challenging. So yeah, man, I did a lot of staring into the middle distance, not being sure what to say. You know what I mean? That's part of why it took so long. I just often did not know on my writing days where to begin.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you say that because writing a short book, I don't know. When I read this, what I appreciated so much was that it was stories that carry,
Mm.
it was your story and the
Yeah,
way you told stories that carried us into the heart of all those issues that you just said are kind of tricky to talk about. We don't know how, they're boring to
yeah,
approach from a certain way. And
yeah.
also, they are, if you write a how to book or a prescriptive self help book or, hey, be a great dad, it's not interesting. I can't,
Hmm.
those things aren't going to come through to me in the same way. So, the
Hmm.
way you approach this, if you're listening to this, obviously you're interested in the topic and us and the work, but the book, The Father You Get and the Ones You Make, Believe in and Become Patton Dodd, go get the book, first of all. And here's why this is really important. Whether you have a father, you know your father, you don't know your father. Patton, you say like you didn't want to think about your father.
Yeah,
And I think a lot of people go, well, I'm not qualified to write a book about, I'm not good enough as a
yeah,
man to write a book. I'm not a good enough father. I didn't have a good enough
yeah,
father figure. I admire you for the courage to just step in and say it's actually because of the complexity of maybe the
yeah.
imperfections of my story that I'm able to write this book. When you say I didn't want to know my dad without giving everything away in the book, why was that hard for you?
I mean, he was a mess of a man, and he was a heavy weight my whole life. Especially as I came into my young adulthood, he was a alcoholic and later, developed drug addictions later in his life. My parents were together my whole life until the very end. She finally left him in 2007 after 39 years of marriage. So I had what you would call an intact home, but there was just a sort of a storm every day because of him and the choices he made. We moved all around the country. There was a lot of chaos. He couldn't hold it together, couldn't keep a job down. He would burn bridges behind him. We would start over a lot when I was a kid. And I hated him, I just hated him. And I got clear about that hatred as I left the home, went away to college and began to experience, other relationships. It helped me put him into even better kind of relief. And so when he died, I was in my early 30s. And it was just a relief to have him gone because we had to deal with him every day in various ways. And my sister and I and our mom. And I know this sounds like, rough and raw, but it's just honestly how I felt. When, I say in the book that people And the week after he died would be like, I'm sorry to hear about your dad. And I would think, that's just because you don't know him. Like, you wouldn't be sorry that he's gone if you knew who he was. I mean, no one showed up to this guy's funeral. Like, it was an empty chapel because he had cut off everyone from with his behavior, and there was no one there. And so I initially, after he was gone, well, for years, really, like I said, I enjoyed being free of him. And when I would, I talked to a therapist, I had a spiritual director and various friends every now and then who would definitely encourage me to like think about that relationship and how it had shaped me. And I certainly did. I mean, it was on my mind, but I didn't want to intentionally think about it. I didn't want to sit with the memory of him. I didn't want to think about how he had formed me. I wanted to be nothing like him. I wanted to shake him off. You know what I mean? But what happened, I mean, Lil suggests that I write that book, but also what was happening in my 40s. I was 46 when I started writing. And in my 40s, I think I was recognizing whether or not I could admit it to myself that he's in me, that he did form me, that I have some of his traits, that I see him in the mirror. You know what I mean? Um, I have some habits and tics, that are just like him. It's just no escaping it. We come from our parents. You know what I mean? It's so I didn't get away without his imprint being on me. And so that's one reality. And the other reality is that I just didn't know him at all. He was a vapor in our home. I say he was present but absent. The part of it is that he was passed out on the couch most every night. But also he just wouldn't talk about himself. And my sister and I would ask mom as we got older a lot, why is dad the way that he is? What happened to him to make him this way? And she didn't really know. She didn't know much about his childhood. He certainly would not talk about his childhood. I have two or three stories of that childhood and nothing else. And so I knew there was something dark in his past, and I didn't know what it was. And I realized I think I need to know. I think I need to find out, what made Bill Dodd into who he was. I think that would help me get to some understanding of who I am, who, you know what I mean? And so I'm grateful that I stepped into this project because otherwise I would still not know anything. And I did end up finding things about my dad and learning, and the discoveries I've made have brought a lot of clarity and helped me just kind of put him into a narrative context that has brought understanding and healing in the way that stories like that can.
Yeah. Well, it's beautiful. The pain, I don't the beauty and pain, that's a hard thing to say it's beautiful, but I was listening to like childhood moments and thinking about you as a kid and adolescence, and then
Yeah.
some of the things you found out in your late adolescent years that you were kind of
Yeah.
unaware of, unconscious of.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about Stephen Wilson Jr. has a song that if you're thinking about dads at all, it's just a beautiful song. I love his writing, but it's called Father's Son. And he says,
Mm-hmm.
I am my father's son. And
Mm-hmm.
he's
Mm-hmm.
reconciling, like, and he has a line that way of talk about writing. He says, the tree doesn't grow very far from the apple. I remember a
Mm-hmm.
friend of mine, he had just
Mm-hmm.
lost his dad, and we have this little tradition. Brian Flannery, by the way, in Oregon. Good to mention you. But we're driving around, and he says, I want to show you a song. And he plays that song, and it just cut me to the core. I was crying again. I guess I cry all the time, but I was crying in his car listening to this Stephen Wilson Jr. song because I realized, like, a lot of my life, I wanted to be my dad so much and for so
Mm-hmm.
many reasons. And then with his diagnosis of Alzheimer's, I was like, I don't want to be him. And yet I am him. And I see him. I eat oatmeal every day. I do like the little mannerisms, little things that are my dad.
Yeah.
And now in my later life, I'm like trying to genetically get him out of me so that I'm not
Yeah.
him. And it's just this
Right.
weird thing. Did you spend Were you conscious of saying, like, I don't want to be that? So many of us grow up going, I don't want to be that guy. Others of us go, I do want to be that guy. And then we realize we are, and we go, maybe I don't want to be my dad. Did you spend conscious time, maybe in the first half of your life, knowing that you were running away from your dad or trying to not be him consciously? Or did that hit you later?
I am very careful about eating with my mouth closed because my father always ate with his mouth open at our table and it drove me crazy. Like from like, high school days, I was like, dang it, I'm gonna sit here and just be the most loudmouth chewer you've ever seen. Um, in so many ways, I've tried to do a 180 from him, small things like that to bigger things. My politics, the way that I believe in my faith, the way that I have friendships. Some of it's maybe just kind of happenstance and natural over time. But yeah, I definitely intended to not be like him. I mean, the ironic truth of it is that I was very much becoming him when I was in high school. I was drinking heavily and doing drugs and yeah, just definitely in line to become very much like my father. And My sister helped wake me up to that. She's 5 years older. She had been out of the house when I was in middle school and high school, and then came home and helped me get my act together and forced me in some ways to get my act together, and helped me get a fresh start. And But yeah, I did I think it's unhealthy actually the many ways in which the way that I detested my father. Um, I tried to define myself in opposition to the way he thought, the way he behaved. Um, some of it is like, I think there's things that I've chosen. I have values that are different than his. One of them is presence. I'm really I try to be very intentional, and I'm not great at it, but I intend to be very present with people because my dad definitely wasn't. I could just tell that like you could be talking to him and who knows where he is, as you're having this conversation. Completely self-occupied and lost within himself, and often again inebriated. And so that's something a long time ago. I was like, I want to be really, in the room that I am in with the people that I am with, and I want to have friends. And like I said, my dad was very alone. He was chatty with everybody, but only like 1 inch deep. And I have a really hard time with small talk, but I will go deep with you, like, pretty quick. And I've got a great community of friends. So yeah, like there's ways in which defining myself against him has I think produced good. He gave me a negative example to respond to. But I did, as I have said before, also need to recognize that I'm a lot like him. There's parts of him, there's traits that he has that I have too, and that are in me. And hating someone and being determined to be nothing like them is usually a really good recipe for mirroring them.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
and so I think that the reflection I've been able to do in writing about him and weighing good and bad and really just putting him into the context of his own story, a story that he would not ever recognize because he just wouldn't tell the truth. But that we can now, my sister and I can now see this is how my dad became the way he is really helpful and liberating for me, and it helps me. I don't really wrestle with now. Am I like him? Am I not like him? That's really not a question that I'm carrying. I am me, and he was him. We're in a relationship. Our stories overlap, but I see the distinctions, and I don't mind the resemblances.
yeah. Yeah. There's another great song from Eric Church that just says some of it comes with age. And I love that
Hmm.
line. Like I think some of this stuff just, it takes time for us to wrestle through that journey.
Hmm.
And maybe just midlife or past, we start to maybe just get tired enough to where we stop running and we go, you know what?
Yeah.
I can't outrun his shadow.
Correct. Yes.
There's parts of him that are in me. There's parts of him that I did break free from.
Yes.
What would you say to the guy who says, I'm scared to get to know my dad. I don't want to know him. And maybe he's hearing this and I have a ton of respect for you, Patton. Like you're brilliant. You're doing incredible work in San Antonio, really creative stuff, really innovative stuff, really by all the marks, like kind and thoughtful and got an honest life of faith and all these things that we aspire to have as men. Like you're just a good human. And So it's cool to be able to see that and say, man, a guy who grew up without a present dad, who had a pretty rough childhood, moved a lot, had all these parts of his story that we would maybe say that person is not going to be able
Yeah.
to live this life.
Sure.
I think just your embodied life says to a lot of us, like, man, I can be really hopeful that I don't have to
Hmm.
live in the shadow of just these broken parts of my story. There can be both of these things true at the same time. But what do you say to the guy
Hmm.
who's like terrified? He has not faced that, and he maybe did put it in the past and hasn't touched it, and is at that point in his life where he's like, I think I want to know a little bit more about my dad, but I'm scared. What do you say to the guy that maybe has that intuition to want to do some of that exploring of his past, but is pretty afraid to open that chapter up?
Well, first of all, I just would say that I relate. I mean, I agreed to write this book, build it around doing reporting on my father. I proposed all that to the publisher, and then I signed a contract, and then I spent a year like running from it, just not doing it at all because I was like, dang it, why did I agree to do this? It's hard. So I would say like I relate. I mean, why why would you want to spend time with this monster or this awkward man or whatever he was, you know? But I would also say that you are never going to be free uh, until you take a chance on doing that work and sitting with your curiosity about who he was. And if you don't have curiosity about who he was, then cultivating that curiosity, because he is in you. He has shaped you. Um, it's part of who you are. And if you want to know yourself, then then you should get to know him. And I would just say take courage, just like it's gonna be okay. It will be hard. Take friends with you,
Mm,
find someone that you can say anything to on this journey. Um, and it will be okay. And there will be treasures that you find, on this path. You don't know what they are. I tell you, I did not have any idea what I would get from this. And I can name it a little bit more now, but I really didn't know. And but you won't regret the time, the emotional effort, the spiritual and psychological effort, and investment that you'll have to make to get to know your father and his story and how it's impacted you. But then you get to carry, that investment and the dividends of it with you for the rest of your life. And it's not just for you, is the last thing I would say. Like if you have kids, do it for them. If you have a spouse, do it for her. Do it for your friends because they need a model of it. I mean, there's so many people who will benefit from you doing that work.
mm,
So take courage and do it.
mm. That's so good. I think like our kids live in our unmade bed or whatever. People have said that. Like there's
Yeah.
the things that we don't have the courage to face. They do. There is something that keeps hanging then over the next generation, and so it is an invitation to.
Correct.
And there's some treasures. I loved getting to parts of the book where there was some things that came through your dad's story that were really cool.
Hmm.
And like you got to see him as a person in a way that you hadn't
Hmm.
seen him before.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
there's the father we get, for sure, and this book is a really wonderful invitation, and you're a great friend to us as somebody who said, "Hey, I went on that journey. Here's what I found, and you can do it too. Maybe come with me." So wonderful for that. And then there's the fathers we make.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, father figures. And the sort of one of the things that I learned in writing this book, I didn't have that title going into it. That came out of a line in the book because I knew that I was going to write about father figures. But what had never occurred to me before is that we create those father figures. Like they don't just appear to us as coaches in our sports leagues or pastors in our churches or bosses or whatever, mentors, older men in our neighborhood. It's a creative act to have a father figure, whether you know it or not. Like you're doing some imaginative work and relating to an older man in that way. You're putting in the position of your dad. You're filling in the blanks that your dad left, maybe, or that maybe you're just left by his absence, even if he was a good or a great man. There's always some things that need to be filled in, and gaps do you have? And, these relationships with older men, I think, are really important. And I think it's good for us to talk about. It was hard for me I'm saying it that way because it was hard for me to admit to myself and then to the reader that I've done a lot of this, that I've made a lot of father figures in my life. I've craved the influence of dad-like figures, and I hate that about myself. At one level, it's embarrassing. Like, I'm so needy, you know what I mean? And so like I want to be like a self-made, independent, macho man, and I'm just not. And I didn't know it, Zach, until I wrote this book. But I started to, because I had one father figure that I was going to write about, a principal one in my 20s and 30s, and I started to look back into my story and realize, oh my gosh, I've been figuring men into father images my whole life.
Mm,
And I remembered that when I was a little boy, I had a imaginary friend. My favorite imaginary friend was named Papa. Papa friend, I called him. And my mom and my sister loved talking about Papa friend. Even my dad, I remember talking to me about Papa friend. They thought it was hilarious. And it never dawned on me until I started writing this book that, oh, of course, that my dad, my imaginary friend, was a father figure. I've been doing this my whole life through. I mean, my brain has been doing it and my heart has been doing it. You know what I mean? It's not like I've chosen to be this way. But I remember chasing after college professors that I just wanted to get to know better, a little bit awkward, you know. And eventually, I ended up in a relationship with a pastor who I very much admired and who was definitely a replacement dad image for me in ways that I was aware of in my 20s. And it went very, very south. And I think that's what that section of the book ends up being about. But um, I think it's important for me to say that, like, I think this tendency that we have to seek father figures is a good one because we are wired for nurturing. There's no way around it. We just are. So I think it's good to lean into that. But I think it's also important that we don't lose agency in that process because there's a power dynamic in these relationships too. And so you have to mind yourself. So I am glad that I'm now able to name that I have agency in these things. I am making these men into and what they are in my minds, and I can take them down if I need to too. You know what I mean? It's kind of a something where you need to open yourself up to it, but also maintain a sense of your own presence in that dynamic, if that makes sense.
yeah, no, it does, and I think you did it really well. I First, that I agree with you. It is really important, and I think it's in us. I think he can be controversial depending on your view of a few different things. But Robert Bly wrote a lot about this idea of individuation and maturation
Yeah,
in
right,
men.
right.
And he says, in fact, like very explicitly, like a man cannot become fully integrated as a man unless he's had someone other than his father. His father can only take him so,
Oh,
and he says a father can only carry us so far, and then someone else needs to take
huh.
us by the hand and lead us on. And it has to
Yeah,
be other men for us to relate those things that our father gave or did not give us. They
yeah.
become embodied in us through other men. It's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily only through our dad. So I think you're not alone in that, and pay attention for a guy or for a spouse, like that male relationship with people who are further along down the road is deeply, deeply important. The complexity of it, as you said, is we begin to make something out of these people. And what I loved, there's a section in the book where Patton does a really good job of calling out and helping give some clarity around the process of how to do that in a healthy way. And I thought that was really helpful. So thank you for that, because so many of us have made so much of these characters that we make in our life that then they do what they all will do, what we all will all disappoint each other. And there's that
Mm-hmm.
crash on the other side. This
Mm-hmm.
figure that you hit, one of the figures that you had made, had this devastating crash. And the other thing
Mm-hmm.
I appreciated about your book is that you didn't demonize this person or destroy this person for their
Mm-hmm.
humanity. Like I always talk about it as
Yeah.
a commingled, we're good, we're broken, we're future all at the same time. Like that's a reality to us. And I really
Yeah.
appreciated you being honest that we can give these people too much and lose our agency,
Yeah.
and they are going to let us down. And then when
Yeah.
somebody does, they don't have to become voted off the island. And I remember reading Jean Vanier was a great influence in my mind, thinking
Hmm.
about community. And when I found out that
Hmm.
some of his
Yeah.
broken chapters,
Right.
it was one
Right.
of those moments where I was like, so do I have to throw out everything I learned from
Right.
Vanier? How do you think about that?
Well,
Like,
I'm so glad you brought this up because the truth is I did uh, demonize him isn't maybe right, but I did come after him in early drafts of this book because I had more to say about things that I'd experienced. You know, he was a prominent pastor, the president of the National Association of Evangelicals, a prominent and visible Christian leader in the aughts. And he had influenced a lot of people. And I did some extra reporting and learned more about him. And I planned on writing all that up for the book. And then I did, and I drafted it out of my system, basically. I mean, the thing you're talking about that is now in the book of me not demonizing him, not going really deep into his story at all, was an editorial choice. It was I drafted different things and then ultimately realized this is not about him and it doesn't do this book or the reader any favors to make it about him. Um, and it's preoccupying. And this is part of the thing, though, with these father figure relationships, is that they can become very preoccupying. You know, you can get a little obsessive with them. And I just decided I need to make this story about my experience of this man, which included some really good things. I mentioned my sister coming into my life and helping me get my life back together when I was like 19 years old. Well, what she did was took me to church, you know? And so this pastor was the pastor of this church, and his teaching was the first fresh hearing I had ever really heard of the gospel, and it was alive, and it was a beautiful invitation, and I believed it and embraced it. And he helped me, yeah, he helped me actually ensure I wouldn't become too much like my father. And so I appreciated him a great deal, and I needed to remember that. I had not remembered that for a long time. I mean, he was exposed in 2006. So if 15 plus years had gone by of me not really reflecting on the goods that he had brought into my life and into the lives of other people, that's also part of the story. But yeah, like, yes, he had a big crash, and is a complicated man to this day. I would imagine. I don't know, but um, uh, and I could explain all that and like really just make it all. It'd be really interesting, maybe in Thorny, and I did write all that up, but ultimately I was like, this is not as interesting as the more actually complicated story in a way of the very good things that he invested in me that are still good and that I can still sit with and cherish and be grateful for. Even though a lot of confusing things happen later, it doesn't actually negate the good that happened.
mm,
So yeah, multiple things can be true at once, right?
mm. Uh, I loved that. And I think for father figures, that, my goodness, I hope that's true, right? Because so
Yeah,
many of us, whether they're large crashes or small, we're going to crash. And I have,
yeah.
well, it's somebody that both of us mutually know. He gave me great advice, and he said he won't hire anyone who hasn't publicly failed. And I've carried that forever.
Wow.
And I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, that's as a prerequisite for hiring. He said, I'm not going to hire anybody who hasn't publicly failed and he said his reasoning was everyone is going to publicly fail at some point. So I would rather, I
It's
want
behind
somebody who
them.
has
Yeah.
already done it, and I want to see how they
Right.
did with it. So I,
Interesting.
we have to be able to be not like an imperfect father who has
Yeah.
handed some good, and there's some broken in there that can't be whitewashed and covered up and ignored.
Yeah.
But it also can't be, we can't rule out all these people in our life. And
Yeah.
I wish I could just stay in all of these spaces, but the father you believe in, the
Yeah.
ones we believe in, is this next
Yeah.
section. And that's complicated for people too, because whether it's
Hmm.
the father we get that's complicated, or the complexity of the ones we make and how we make them, or this editorial choice that in Christian circles, or maybe the reason we're not in Christian circles is because we can't edit out this father figure of God. And that's, no matter how hard we try, it appears in some other way. And so we can make too much of it, we can make not enough of it. That's a complex thing too. But you wrestle through your faith and just the reality
Yeah.
of God as father in a really beautiful way too. At this point in your life, how maybe have what have you learned that's allowed you to appreciate or maybe benefit from that aspect of the Christian faith in a fresh way, right? In a beautiful way.
I mean, I think I'll always have a little bit of a hard time thinking of God as a father. Just given the way that I was raised and how I experienced my own dad. When I became a Christian, it's really common, especially for young men, I would imagine, for people to encourage you to think of God as a father, a healing father. Or people think that sort of theological concept can be healing, and it can be. But for me, it was just like I didn't want to think about God that way. I would have much to have preferred if if it had been an available concept about a mothering God in evangelical circles. I probably would have been very alive to that because I had a very loving mother, and that would have made sense to me. But fathering presences didn't feel good to me. So, um, I definitely feel differently about it now. I feel open to this idea of a father-like God. I think that obviously Jesus did a lot of work on that idea, and I mentioned in the book that he sort of invents the concept. I mean, it's not very predominant in the Jewish imagination about God that we have in the Old Testament and the Jewish scriptures. It's sparsely there. And then for Jesus, it's central. He kind of invites us to think of God as a father. He talks about God as a father. Um, Paul obviously picks that up and continues with it. And so it was a fresh idea, I think, and a controversial, obviously, idea also at that time. And I wanted to return to that basically and like kind of defamiliarize it. It's so common and familiar to us. I think it can be good to get some distance from things that are so common, especially when it comes to faith. And I actually planned to write that section of the book a little bit more academically, to do kind of an intellectual history of this concept of God the Father. And I wrote that. It's very boring, and so I was like, this is not working. No one's gonna want to read this. Um, and so I started to, yeah, remember to think about like my own relationship with this idea, and it's mostly given to me as a person of faith, as a person who does indeed believe, although I have struggled mightily to believe. I've had lots of periods of great doubt, but the through line for me in having faith is my mother. And so I decided maybe it's better to think about more interesting and creative and a better story to think about the way my mother, who had a very troubled life, but a very thick and persistent faith and a beautiful faith that she labored to hand to me. Um, and that was the shelter in the storm in my home, really, was her life of faith. And it was, faith in general, but also faith in God the Father in particular. Father God, Father God, Father God. Like, I mean, she talked about it in that way. She'd lost her own dad when she was 5 years old. He had died. He had drowned. And so I think she was clinging to this idea that there is a father for me and that he's with me all the time. And that's probably where Papa Friend came from for me as well. I mean, so I decided to narrate my mom's story as a way of thinking through this kind of theology, and this concept. And to answer your question, what it has ended up doing for me at this stage of my life is helped me just kind of relax about it all. I relax about my doubts and my faith, and God as a father, and God as all the other things that God is,
Mm.
and just kind of, yeah, exhale a little bit about it all.
Yeah. I could feel that exhale by the end of the book with the honesty about your doubts and your life of faith and all of that.
Yeah,
But then also just this beautiful reality that there was a father present, your mom's faith, that there was,
yeah,
that you were
that's
never
correct.
in the absence of a father who is maybe living up to everything we hope a father will live up to, your mom had this rock solid belief that that was
Yeah.
in some ways absent, but always present. And I love the little note. You'll have to read the book to find this out, but the conversation between your mom and her doctor toward the end of her life, and
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like his recognition of the
Yes.
depth of her faith was just it
Yes.
was a
Beautiful.
beautiful
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, what a journey. This is what a gift to our all of us as men, our families, our kids, and to our moment. I think go get the book, The Father You Get and the Ones You Make, Believe in, and Become Patton Dodd. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. And before I run out of time, there's the one we become. And this was maybe the beautiful part for me of just reading it, crying, laughing, all the things, going, man, it's really beautiful to be a dad. It's really beautiful
Yeah. It is.
to be a father. And
Yeah.
as our kids get older, I felt exactly what you described, that there's a lesson that parenting is an opportunity. I think you said a lifelong opportunity for us to realize that it's not about us. And I'm feeling that in real
Yeah.
time as my kids become their own people, and you're
Yeah.
not the center of their lives. And
Yeah.
you call this out and say that decentering is a beautiful thing. And so
Yeah.
before I run
Yeah.
out of time, I want to ask you two things. One, just that idea of decentering. Where did that develop from, and like why is that so important at this stage? You're looking back, being a father. I think it's great advice for us as we're very much the center of so many things early on in
Hmm.
fatherhood. But you say there's this really important decentering to think about.
Well, I think it really came from my relationship with my oldest kid as she began to leave the home, and feeling frustrated with that process and the way she handled it, and then how out of touch she became, and how rejected that made me feel, and how I carried our relationship also like a heavy weight. I felt, yeah, hurt and frustrated, and I mean, I was excited that she was going to school, but like, why is there so little communication, and why am I finding out really important things that happened to you a year later? Like, what is, you know what I mean? I thought we were close. I thought she would tell me anything, and I learned that that she wouldn't, that she wasn't. And that's one answer to your question, is me wrestling just with that very common experience of a kid leaving home, and realizing that this is the point where a lot of parents ruin their relationships with their adult kids, because they get resentful about
Mm.
what is actually super normal. Like, she's individuating, you know? It's like she needs to do. I did it too. I love my mom. There's a whole section of this book. There's thousands of words about how much I love my mom, but I didn't call her very often at all when I was that age, you know? And even much older. I was, yeah. So like but I spent a couple years really wrestling, and she would come home and we would have arguments, and I feel awful about those now. And it's just, those arguments just came out of my hurt. Where have you been? And why am I not the center of your attention? And eventually I realized, like, this cannot be about me.
Mm.
If I make this relationship and even our communication protocols and all that about me, I am not going to have this relationship when she's in her 30s and 40s. I see that happening with a lot of my friends and their parents. There's just a distance that develops and frustration, and the parents, as they get older, get more and more frustrated with that distance and feel resentfulness about it, which creates bigger distance. And I see that happening all the time. And I do not want that. I realize my main goal is that I have a relationship with these people as I get older. I want to be in their lives. And I don't have to define what that looks like. I just want it, whatever it can be.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I mean, we're all self-centered. We all, and it's okay. It's like we are literally the center of attention for us. Like, the world is like a 360-degree arc coming out of our brains for us. You can't see the world another way. That's our perspective. And having that perspective and where you are is a good thing and a granted thing. But I think as we get older, we have to learn to not be the central figure, especially in some of these key relationships. And so negotiating that in my own heart as a parent. It just, I choose to not let my feelings get hurt. She's not trying to hurt my feelings. I've since talked to her about all this. I mean, she's not trying to hurt my feelings at all. She loves me very much.
Yeah.
It's not on my terms all the time, the way she loves me, but I just need to freaking grow up and be okay with that. And so that's where that section comes from. It's just thinking really through this one relationship and learning a lot from it.
Yeah. It was awesome. I loved it. Just as a dad of 3 daughters, you tell a story of your daughter coming home and telling you about this experience, and you
Yeah.
kind of having your own thoughts, and then realizing later, I think, to look back and go, "Man, what if I would have just asked her, like, let me get to know you a little bit. Like, let me
Yes. Yes.
ask a
Right.
different question." And that was just a great tactical piece of parenting advice. So nested within a really rich, complex
Yeah.
story, there's some really practical things that I took out of this to just go, man,
Hmm.
thank you for that. Thanks for a little bit of wisdom from a dad who's been doing it longer than I have, to say, hey, don't maybe approach it this way. Just get to know her. And I
Hmm.
thought, man, how many times have I taken this approach and it's been a cul-de-sac versus this that's opened up to
Hmm.
something? So, man, thank you so much. Being a father, fathers are complicated. Father's Day is complicated. That's kind of where we opened it.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
beautiful. And I left this book going, man, I want to be a great dad. And sometimes I think the pressure I put on myself is I need to know it perfectly, do it perfectly, figure it all out, have it all wired, read all the books, because I don't want to mess up my kids, and that'll be the very thing that messes them up. So you
Hmm.
make a really great invitation to say that maybe the most important thing that a dad can learn how to do is to not know, and that ability to know how to not know is really important. And so I want to give you just the last word a little bit, maybe, to say, I love your perspective on faith, that you're learning to relax, but what does it mean to you to learn how to know not to know?
One of the things that is a kind of a condition of contemporary manhood and our ideals of manhood is that men are expected to be super competent across a wide range of tasks, and and then just to know a lot. And I think that what we can accidentally do, what my dad certainly did, is respond to questions from your kids with like bluster and with like pretending that you know things you don't, with being overly confident about something. And I tell a story of asking my dad about how to finance college, and I went deep, deep, deep into debt, both credit card debt and student loan debt while I was in school, and it was because of advice my dad gave me, and he gave it to me with so much confidence and clarity. And it wasn't until years later that I realized this was terrible advice. And I trusted it in part because this is my dad, and he told me what to do. It didn't matter, who he was and the way he was still my father. And he told me he knew how the world worked, I thought, when I was 18 years old. And so I think it's really hard when our kids come to us with questions. If we're not sure, I think it's actually hard just to say, I don't know. That's a good question. I think we spin a lot. I think we front a lot. Maybe you don't, but I certainly do. At least I have the temptation to. And one of the things that this is new for me. I mean, I think I was coming to it as I wrote those lines, but I am trying to learn to be more and more comfortable and confident in telling my kids, I don't know. That's a good question. I'm uncertain about that. Maybe we can figure it out together. I'll ask somebody. I just to sit with your own ignorance and not feel shame around it and not feel like you have to pretend, is I think really important in all kinds of aspects of your life, but certainly in your relationship with your children.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved that too, because the reality that hit me was the gifts. And you talk about what we give our kids and what a father gives their kids, and I think one of those things is the permission to, at some point in their life, say, I don't know. And
Hmm. For
if
sure.
we always know, and we're always the people pretending to know because we don't always know, then we
Yeah.
set this super unrealistic expectation for them that they're supposed to somehow know. And what a
Yeah.
cool place to meet a kid and say,
Yeah.
you're going to live in a really beautiful, complex life. And most of the time, you're not going to know. And so being
Yeah.
able to be comfortable in that is really, really important. And
Yeah.
Man, we could go for forever. Happy Father's Day. That's what I want to say to
Thank
you,
you.
man.
Same to you, Zach.
You're a great one, and it was cool. The father you get and the ones you make and believe in and become. I think this book is beautifully written. It is art, so you're going to enjoy the book as a piece of art. Just it's living and it's breathing and it's beautiful, but it's a really important book. I think to just some own personal healing comes through it. I know I can say that as a father and having a father, but I think really important in our conversation culturally to just give some attention to this. So, Patton, thank you for the 4 years, the investment, the vulnerability, the risk, the courage. And you'll have to buy a beer for the editor who told you to write it because it's a beautiful book. So,
There you go.
yeah,
Yes.
everybody go get it. But happy Father's Day. Thank you for sharing some time. Beautifully done.
Thank you, Zach.